Greetings, friends. It's me, Wayne. Hopefully you can hear me. Yeah, late the Bible study. Imagine that. Good thing it wasn't church. You'd probably hear a sermon on it, right? So here it is. Early in the morning, 9 o'clock, having my coffee, and I really wanted to do this biblical study on Balaam because there's a lot of interesting stuff that happens and that's buried in the biblical literature. And that when you read and you start looking at the writing styles, motifs, and biblical criticism and things like that, all this interesting stuff comes out. So what are we going to be doing? We're going to be looking at Dead Sea Scroll Bible, especially the text Numbers 4Q number B out of Dead Sea Scroll Bibles, because there's some interesting stuff in there. Dead Sea Scrolls, I consider personally a little bit more reliable than all the edited texts that come out in English translations later, because these were in caves. A lot of stuff is missing and in between, but what they do is they take the Dead Sea Scroll text, compare them to the Samaritan Pentateuch, the Septuagint, Masoretic text, and translations that we have today, and then you can really see the differences between the text and commentary and things like that. So how did it exist before everything was put together, so to speak? And how did all these other texts compare? Also, characters such as Balaam, diviners that show up in the biblical literature, extra biblical literature written about them in the ancient Near East. We're going to look at some Plaster texts about Balaam and some of his prophecies. So he could have been a pretty famous diviner back in the day. And then we're going to look at some later Jewish literature, which goes into explaining and filling in some of the gaps that was written much later, but talk about the wars of the cousins and things like that, and the Chronicles of Jeremiah. So we'll look at some of that, and Balaam is in that text as a diviner still, and as a shield bearer when he's about 15. And this is extra biblical literature about the patriarchs and the wars in Egypt and Africa and all that. There's a lot of explanation and a lot of filling in, a lot of mythology and storytelling on what could have happened, or speculations about that. Because back in the day, it wasn't written history as we have it today. It was more or less history being transferred through storytelling, and also through lessons and metaphor. All kinds of stuff was combined with it. And people wondered about the areas where it wasn't explained very well. So the Rebbe's would take it up, and writers would write on it with commentary. You have Rashi commentary later coming, and then many others. And then people would add to the stories about how they thought it would go down, and how the patriarchs dealt with one another, and all this kind of stuff. And it's pretty amazing. So we'll get into some of that. And also talking animals, right? There's two times it happens in the biblical literature. One is the serpent in Genesis, and the other is the talking ass of Balaam. And it's amazing. So we'll look at some of the humorous things that goes on in Jewish literature also, because it's poking fun at a Gentile diviner. And also we'll take a look and we'll compare the talking ass to the horses of Achilles after Patroclus is struck down in the Iliad. Book 19 talks about Achilles chastising his horses, saying, hey, bring me back. Don't let me be like Achilles and leave me dead on the field. And the Queen Hera, the goddess of the skies, opens the horse's mouth, and they give this big long speech to the raging Achilles. It's beautiful. So it happened elsewhere, and that's what we're going to look at. So We're going to read the text in Numbers 22 to 24. It's going to be a little bit long and drawn out, so just bear with me. Hopefully I can make it a little bit exciting. And man, I love this stuff. So we're not going to read the whole thing, because you can do that on your own and think about it. So in this text, it breaks away from the normal writing to tell us a story. And buried in this is an ancient poem. So if you take all four of Balaam's predictions and you take out the storyline, put them all together, it's believed that it could be an ancient poem written in prose. It's beautiful. So let's start that. So the children of Israel, they're at their edge, about ready to go into the promised land. This is the last thing that they need to deal with. And so Balak, who is a king, was alarmed. So you get the worry about mass immigration, like today, mass immigration. And Moab was all afraid. He's like, man, these people are going to eat up all my resources. So here you have the same kind of idea, almost, that Pharaoh had, and that Pharaoh was worried about. And also other places where they fear the mass migration of the Israelis. Say, no, don't come through here. When they ask, can we cross your land? No. So Balak ends up calling up Balaam, who is a diviner, and he prophesies. And what's interesting is a lot of times people think that there is no conflict with literature. There are people out there who believe that. But once you start reading these accounts in Dead Sea Scroll text, definitely you will see the difference. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And if you could pick it up, there's a really good book called the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible. It's the oldest known Bible translated the first time into English. And it comes in handy. This is going to show upside down on my screen because my camera's messed up. But here we go for 22, and this is the heading. Although 4Q numbers often agrees with the Samaritan Pentateuch against the Masoretic text and the Septuagint, in several instances it shares with the Septuagint readings that are not in the Masoretic text or in the Samaritan Pentateuch. Two examples are in verse 1:1. Verse 11, Balak's statement, and they, that is the Israelites, are dwelling next to me. Compare verse 5. And his hope that he will be able to drive them out of the land. In both cases, the longer reading repeats information found in earlier chapters. Such agreements between 4Q numbers and the Septuagint remind us that there is no easy task to decide which is the most ancient form of biblical text. So yeah, a lot of people say, well, this is going to be easy. These are small areas. However, when you get into the Psalms, it's much bigger than that. So what we're going to do is take up the account, and we're going to be reading this from the Jewish Publication Society Bible, the Study Bible from the JPS, Tanakh translation. So if you can get a hold of this, this is a pretty good piece of literature, and I like reading it. It's kind of more like a liberal translation. So here we go in chapter 22. Now, Hebrew chapters break up differently than English chapters. So if you get the old KJV, Praise Jesus Bible, it's going to be a little bit different than in the Hebrew Tanakh. So Hebrew chapters are broken up differently. So chapter 22 starts actually in 21, verse 33. So we're going to take up where the traditional 22 would start. The Israelites then marched on and encamped on the steppes of Moab, across from the Jordan of Jericho. Balak, the son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. Moab was alarmed because the people were so numerous. Moab dreaded the Israelites. And Moab said to the elders of Midian, "Now this horde will lick me clean, all that is about us, and lick up our asses and grass of the field." Balak, son of Zippor, who was king of Moab that time, sent messengers to Balaam, son of Beor, in Pethor, which is by the Euphrates, in the land of his kinfolk, to invite him, saying, "There was a people that came out of Egypt, it hides the earth from the view, and it is settled next to me. Come then, put a curse upon this people for me, since they are too numerous for me. Perhaps I can thus defeat them and drive them out of the land. For I know that he whom bless is blessed indeed, and him who you curse is cursed." The elders of Moab and the elders of Midian, versed in divination, set out. They came to Balaam and gave him Balak's message, and he said to them, "Spend the night here, and I shall reply to you as the Lord may instruct me." So the Moabite dignitaries stayed with Balaam. So what's interesting is whenever you come across in biblical literature a name with the father's name and where he's from, take note of that person, because it ends up being more than just his name being mentioned. So they knew that person. So it's not like Uriah the Hittite. They knew his father, they knew where he was from. So they're going to write about him. So he was probably a pretty famous diviner. And also, check out the names of these people, because a lot of times in biblical literature, their names end up meaning how they functioned in the story. So that's interesting too. So here, elders are sent to Balaam. Balaam is a Gentile or a non-Israelite, and here the biblical writers are going to poke fun at Balaam and about Gentile diviners, and how even though there's all these signs and they know all the things that they need to do, because back in the ancient Near East they had it down to a science. As above, so below, and vice versa. The way the wind blew, or if two robins were on a tree, it's even picked up in the Iliad quite a bit. Here the diviner, the Israeli god, the Israeli deity, takes control of that and makes him speak the way that he should speak, and Balaam knows it. And it's really interesting how the authors play this out. So moving on, I just wanted to read part of the commentary for the new JPS, from the new JPS. The story of the seer. Inserted into the narrative of Israel's final preparation to enter Canaan is the story of the Moabite king Balak and the prophet Balaam, whom he hires to curse Israel into oblivion. This independent composition, possibly originating from different scribal circles than those associated with other portions of Numbers, is composed of narrative poetry. It is inserted at this juncture, the beginning of Israel's period of encampment at Moab, because the outcome of Balak's scheme determines if Israel will inherit the Promised Land. The account is a contrast in the divine realm between God of Israel and those supernatural elements available to Balak. At times amusing and somewhat mocking of the non-Israelite prophet, the message of the pericope is serious. The intent of the Lord resides supreme and cannot be superseded. Even the powers of the well-known non-Israeli prophet are ultimately controlled by God. In the end, nothing in Balaam's 4 oracles extracts a curse upon Israel. In fact, his prophecies function in reverse, blessing Israel and cursing her enemies. The biblical traditions are not consistent in their assessment of Balaam's intentions. In Deuteronomy and in Joshua, it is God who reverses Balaam's actual intent. Numbers 31:16 blames Balaam for the for Israel's apostasy at Baal Peor, implying that previously sought to curse them. The memory preserved in the writings of the 8th century prophet Micah is more compatible and the most favorable to Numbers 22 to 24 accounts. Post-biblical literature is also divided on the evaluations of Balaam. So in this, they're very unsure how this functions. You can see multiple writers viewing Balaam in this account differently. So in verse 9 of 22, God came to Balaam and said, "What do these people want with you?" Balaam said to God, "Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, sent me this message. Here is the people that came out of Egypt. He hides the earth from view. Come now and curse them for me. Perhaps I can engage them in battle and drive them off." And God said to Balaam, "Do not go with them. You must not curse that people, for they are blessed." Balaam arose in the morning and said to Balak's dignitaries, "Go back to your own country, for the Lord will not let me go with you." The Moabite dignitaries left, and they came to Balak and said, "Balaam refused to come with us." So he refuses to go. So Balak says, "Hey, Balaam, I'll throw some money at you. Why don't you come my way?" And so it kind of changes Balak's mind. Balaam's mind. Because Balak, the king, sends better dignitaries with the promise of huge bucks. And that may have sounded good to Balaam, so he sets out. And this is where it gets interesting. And here is when the story switches up. Then Balak, in verse 15, then Balak sent other dignitaries, more numerous and distinguished than the first. And they came to Balaam and said to him, "Thus says Balak, son of Zippor, please do not refuse to come to me, and I will reward you richly, and I will do anything you ask of me." So in verse 21, Balaam rises up in the morning, he saddles his ass, and departed with the Moabite dignitaries. But God was incensed at his going, so an angel of the Lord placed himself in his way as an adversary. So here, as a Satan, the adversary, as a Satan, or as a blocking, which is interesting, because in biblical literature, Old Testament, Ha-Satan, the adversary, not the devil. So then we get the talking donkey. So here they're poking fun at Balaam, because here the donkey can see the angel with the lifted sword in front of him as he tries walking by, and he veers off the road. Balaam gets all upset, starts beating the donkey. So here Balaam, who is supposed to be a diviner and supposed to be able to see, does not see what even the donkey does. And the divine opens the mouth of the donkey and it speaks to Balaam. So here is that story. This is great. He was riding on a she-ass with his 2 servants alongside, when the ass caught sight of the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his sword drawn in his hand. And the ass swerved from the road and went into the fields. And Balaam beat the ass to turn her back onto the road. The angel of the Lord then stationed himself in a lane between the vineyards, with a fence on either side. The ass, seeing the angel of the Lord, pressed herself against the wall and squeezed Balaam's foot against the wall. So he beat her again. Once more the angel of the Lord moved forward and stationed himself on the spot, so narrow that there was no room to swerve right or left. When the ass now saw the angel of the Lord, she lay down under Balaam. And Balaam was furious, and he beat the ass with a stick. Then the Lord opened the ass's mouth, and she said to him, "What have I done to you, that you have beaten me 3 times?" And Balaam said to the ass, "You have made a mockery of me, If I had a sword with me, I would kill you. And the ass said to Balaam, Look, I am the ass that you've been riding all along until this day. Have I been in the habit of doing thus to you? And he answered, No. Then the Lord uncovered Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord sitting in the way, his sword drawn in his hand. Thereupon he bowed right down to the ground. The angel of the Lord said to him, Why have you beaten your ass these 3 times? It is I who come out as an adversary, for the errand is obnoxious to me. And when the ass saw me, she shied away because of me those 3 times. If she had not shied away from me, you are the one I should have killed, while sparing her. And Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, I erred because I did not know that you were standing in my way. If you still disapprove, I will turn back. But the angel of the Lord said to Balaam, Go with the men, but you must not say anything, only what I tell you. So Balaam went with Balak's dignitaries. And Balak heard that Balaam was coming. He went out to meet him at Moab, which is Arnon border, at its furthest point. And Balak said to Balaam, When I first sent to invite you, why didn't you come to me? I am really unable to reward you. Am I really unable to reward you? Balaam said to Balak, Now that I have come to you, I have power to speak freely. I can utter only the word that God puts into my mouth. Balaam went with Balak, and they came to Kithor-Wasor. Probably screwed that up. And Balak sacrificed oxen and sheep, and had them served to Balaam and the dignitaries with him. In the morning, Balak took Balaam up to Bamoth Baal. From there, he could see a portion of the people. So that's pretty interesting. So you had poking fun at Gentile. You have the talking ass that sees what the diviner does not see, which later he sees. And also, in the next text, we see rituals repeated over and over again on how these diviners brought about their visions and speakings. So what I wanted to do is read that section out of the Iliad. I know this is kind of like off track, where the horse talks to Achilles. Achilles struck his stance, helmed for battle now, glittering in his armor like the sun astride the skies, his ringing, daunting voice commanding his father's horses. Roan beauty and charger, illustrious fowls of light foot. Try hard, do better this time. Bring your charioteer back home alive to his waiting Argive comrades, once they're through with fighting. Don't leave Achilles there on the battlefield as you left Patroclus dead. And Roan Beauty the horse, with his flashing hoofs, spoke up from under the yoke, bowing his head low. So his full mane came streaming down the yoke pads, down along the yoke to sweep the ground, while the white-armed goddess Hera gave him voice. Yes, we will save your life, this time too, master, mighty Achilles. But the day of death already hovers near, and we are not to blame, but a great God is, and the strong force of fate. Not through our want of speed or any lack of care did the Trojans strip the armor off Patroclus' back. It was all that matchless god, sleek-haired Leto's son. He killed him among the champions and handed Hector glory. Our team could race with the rush of the west wind, the strongest, swiftest blast on earth, men say. Still, you are doomed to die by force, Achilles, cut down by a deathless god and mortal man. Beautiful. So getting back to the Balaam story, he gives 4 oracles, and as I said, if you go into the biblical literature and you take these 4 oracles, pull them out of the literature, put them on a page, maybe in a word processor, you get an ancient poem, and it's really beautiful. So I just want to read, this happens 4 times. The ritual that is gone through 4 times, 3 times, on how to bring about the vision. So this is 23, verse 14. With that, he took him to Sebadosim. Probably screwed that up. On the summit of Pisgah. He built 7 altars and offered a bull and a ram on each altar. And Balaam said to Balak, "Stay here beside your offerings, while I seek a manifestation yonder." The Lord manifested himself to Balaam and put a word in his mouth, saying, "Return to Balak and speak thus." And he went to him and found him standing beside his offerings. And the Moabite dignitaries came with him. And Balak asked, "What did the Lord say?" And he took up this theme. So what's interesting, he recites the poetry, and it's beautiful because it's written in poetic form. And if you get a Hebrew Bible that is written as such, like the JPS is, you can see this poetry right here out, and they usually format it that way in the text. Also, I want to take it back to for another ancient poem while we're on the topic. This is 21, verse 27 of Numbers. Numbers 21:27. Here they talk about the bards. This is great. Now Heshbon was a city of Sihon, king of the Amorites, who had fought against the former king of Moab and had taken all of his land from him as far as Aranon. Therefore the bards would recite, and there's that beautiful poem there, so you can go back and read that. So Balak does this a few times, and he clearly does not bring about what Balak wanted. And in 24, at the start of chapter 24, it says, "Now Balaam, seeing that it pleased the Lord to bless Israel, did not, as on previous occasions, go in search of omens, but turned his face toward the wilderness. As Balaam looked up and saw Israel encamped tribe by tribe, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, taking up this theme," he said. And then it gives the title. And then in verse 10:24, Balak becomes enraged. Enraged at Balaam, Balak struck his hands together. "I called you," Balak said to Balaam, "to damn my enemy. Instead you have blessed him, and these 3 times. Back with you at once to your own place. I was going to reward you richly, but the Lord has denied you the reward." Balaam replied to Balak, But I even told the messengers you sent to me. Though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not, of my own accord, do anything good or bad to the contrary of the Lord's command. What the Lord says, I must say. And now as I go back to my people, let me inform you of what this people will do to your people in the days to come. And he gives an apocalyptic sermon in Hebrew poetry. Beautiful. So you can pull that out and use that. So Balaam and Balak go back home. So that's it for that. So what I want to do is, as I promised before, I wanted to go back and read the ancient Near Eastern text on Plaster that they have found on Balaam, son of Beor. And they call these combinations. The researchers found sections of burnt plaster in the Tel Deir Allah near the river Zerkah, near the biblical Jabbok, in eastern Jordan Valley. So here, if you ever get this book, Prophets and Prophecies in the Ancient Near East, uh, excellent. It gives you Hittite everything and plenty of stuff out of Babylonian prophecies. So after you read this and go through this, the techniques that the prophets used in biblical literature will not seem that out of place when compared to ancient Near Eastern literature, and it's excellent. So combination 1 concerns the vision of Balaam. This is on page 208 of Prophets and Prophecy in the Ancient Near East. A seer of the gods, who is also known in the biblical tradition, recorded in Numbers 22 to 24. Like the prophets of Israel, Balaam in this account is privy to the deliberations of the divine council. The assembled deities, known in the account alternatively as the gods, or the Shaddai. Now see, in biblical literature, El Shaddai, here in ancient Near East, El Shaddai. Shaddayin, a term related to the divine epithet El Shaddai, have ordained a catastrophe, and they charge a certain celestial being to execute the destruction on their behalf. Unfortunately, only the first letter of her name has been preserved, so her identity can only be a matter of conjecture. Like the deceiving spirit or the lying spirit sent forth from the divine council witnessed by the prophet Micah, the son of Imlah, in 1 Kings 22:15 to 18. That text there was concerning Ahab. So here we have the prophet going before the king, and Micah says to the king, you know, I've witnessed the counsel of the Lord, some on his left, some on his right. And they asked, who will go to Ahab? And a lying spirit came forward and said, I will go. Back to the text. And like the adversary in the divine council, who was permitted by God to set forth harm to Job. This is found Job 1:6 to 12 and Job 2:1 to 8. She plays a destructive role. The impending doom is that she is to bring about the impending doom that she is about to bring about, is in many ways reminiscent of the end of the world scenarios that are often found in the Bible, notably in the preaching of the prophets. Creation will apparently be undone as the cosmic floods will be released upon the earth. The bolts of heaven will be broken. The dark rain clouds will cover the skies, and there will be pitch darkness on the terror of the earth. The second half of combination 1 is exceedingly difficult, in large because of the fragmentary nature of the text. Still, the scene described seems constant with other depictions of divinely ordained catastrophes. The world is upside down as creatures of the earth act contrary to their nature. The mention of a number of unsavory creatures also echoes the oracles of doom in biblical prophetic eschatology. So let's move on to that Plaster, and I'll give you a reading of that. This is the English translation, and it's fairly hard to read simply because there's breaks in the text because it's in pretty bad shape. So I'm going to read part of that. The warning of the book of Balaam, son of Beor. So this is interesting. So there was probably a whole book of this. Who was a seer of the gods. The gods came to him at night and spoke to him according to the oracle of El. They said to Balaam, son of Beor, thus, unreadable, do hereafter, no one has seen, unreadable. When Balaam arose on the morrow, his hands was slack, his right hand hung low. He fasted continually in his chamber. He could not sleep, and he wept continually. Then his people came up to him, and they said to Balaam, son of Beor, why do you fast, and why do you weep? He said to them, sit down, and I shall tell you what the Chaldeans have done. Come, see the acts of the gods. The gods gathered together. The Chaldeans took their places in the assembly, and they said to the unreadable, may you break the bolts of heaven with your rain cloud, bringing about darkness and not light, eeriness and not your brightness. May you bring terror through the dark rain cloud. May you never again be aglow. For the bird taunts the eagle, and the voice of the vulture resounds. The young of the bird, and one ripes the young of cormorants. The swallow lost my spot. The swallow mangles the dove and the sparrow. Unreadable instead of unreadable. It is staff that is led. Instead of ewes, it is the rod that is led. The hares eat unreadable. Serfs are filled with beer. The unreadable are drunk with wine. The hyenas heed instruction, and the whelps of the fox unreadable. Multitudes go with unreadable, laughs at the wise. Strongness mixes myrrh, while the priestess unreadable. To the one who wears a tattered girdle, the one who is esteems, and the one who esteems is esteemed. Unreadable and the deaf hear from afar. Unreadable, all see oppression from Shagarwa Ashtar. Unreadable to the leopard, the piglet chases the young. Unreadable and the eye. So that's kind of combination one. So there you get an idea of the heavenly council as seen in 1 Kings, as we said. Excellent stuff. And there's two more combinations with that. So jumping ahead to how Balaam is viewed in later Hebrew writings, explaining the text, we have the account out of the Chronicles of Jeremiah, and this is from the book Ancient Israel, Myths and Legends. If you can pick up that book, 3 volumes in one, they have 3 volumes. But here it's on volume 2, page 179. And here he's mentioned, this is in the War of the Cousins, which is really interesting. This is an extension text about the patriarchs as they lived in Egypt, Jacob and all that. Zepho, the commander-in-chief of the African armies, had never given up his plans of revenge. Continually, he urged King Agnias to invade Egypt and to attack the sons of Jacob. But he always met with refusal on the part of the king, who, knowing the strength and courage of the sons of Jacob, feared to meet them in the open field. At last, however, a day came when Agnias was persuaded by his general and granted the latter's request. A vast army as numerous as the sand on the seashore was equipped, ready to match and invade Egypt and attack the sons of Jacob. Now it happened that among the servants, shield-bearers of Agnias, there was a youth called Balaam, the 15 years old son of Beor. He was very clever lad and well versed in science of magic. Agnias, knowing that Balaam, the son of Beor, was adept in magic, said to the lad, "Try to discern by virtue of thy magic what will be the issue of the battle and who will be victorious in the war we're about to wage, we or the sons of Jacob." Thus spoke King Agnias, and Balaam, the younger son of Beor, had brought wax to him, out of which he molded and fashioned the figures of men on horseback and their war chariots, and so he disposed the wax figures as to represent 2 hostile armies facing each other. Thereupon he plunged the wax figurines into magic water, and holding a palm branch in hand, he practiced incantations. He saw the figurines representing the army of Aeneas, subdued by those representing the sons of Jacob. This vision he communicated to the king, who grew frightened, lost his courage, and dared not to proceed with the war. So that's interesting how writers added later context to that. So hopefully you enjoyed that little study, and I kind of been wanting to do it for some time. But take care, friends, and be well. And remember, if everybody's thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking.